There is an ancient Chinese text called the I Ching. When I was in high school and going through the ranks at my kung fu school, I was curious about Chinese philosophy, and a friend of mine bought an old, used copy of the I Ching in English, along with the Tao Te Ching and the Analects of Confucius. The Tao Te Ching seemed pretty similar to Psalms to me, more on that later, and the Analects seemed a lot like Proverbs. Later, I would learn that Jesuit missionaries like Matteo Ricci to China praised Confucius as similar to Aristotle. The I Ching, so far as I can tell, has always been viewed suspiciously by Christians. The I Ching is a book of divination. You employ some kind of system to get a set of binary choices. I was already doing a little bit of computer programming at that point, so I understood binary. I didn't understand why they picked the number 6 and 9 instead of 1 and 0, but math is not my strong point, and I pretty much figured that one number is as good as another. We read the introduction, and the method described there to make your binary choices involved separating out sticks. We use straws, trying to eyeball the pile in half until you end up with something between 6 and 9 inclusive. It was time-consuming and tedious, and we were young and impatient. We figured that we can create binary choices by flipping coins. It turns out that we weren't the first ones to come up with that idea. Although, to be fair, our system was quite a bit simpler than the standard coin flipping method. We flipped a coin to find out if it's yin or yang, then flipped another to find out if it's stable or changing, and then that was that line. If we'd have thought about it, we'd have just used 4 rolls of an 8-sided die. Done in 4 rolls, not 12 flips. My friend didn't consider himself to be Christian, but we both found the idea of asking a static book for answers to dynamic questions to be silly. We never asked the I Ching anything, but it was a long, opaque book with no storyline, and flipping coins to get a hexagram was a quicker and easier way to end up at a random place than creating a poster with all the hexagrams and throwing darts. Often, out of a sense of curiosity, we would read not only the hexagram that we landed on, but 2 or 3 ahead and behind it. We would create questions after the fact that all the hexagrams we look at wouldn't answer, but it was mostly an exercise in showing how silly divination was in general. That particular friend moved away when I was in my sophomore year of high school. We didn't make any particular attempt to stay in touch. I wouldn't have any access to the I Ching until the internet started to become more robust in the early 2000s. Even then, I wasn't particularly drawn to it. It felt like a lot of work to get nowhere. Logic and reason seemed to me to be the right way to get to any answer. Flipping a coin was exactly the opposite of that. Maybe in the case of social and romantic decisions it makes sense to bring an emotional calculus to the rational decision, but even that isn't random in the same way as flipping a coin. When I was 22, I ended up with a decision to make that didn't have a clear rational or emotional sense. It was a choice between 2 coworkers' home parties. A friend suggested that I flip a coin, and my objection that I didn't make decisions that way, my friend mockingly suggested that I ask God to guide the coin. Lacking a better way to make the decision, that's what I did. It worked. I went to a coworker's barbecue, and at the same time another friend had a party going on where the police showed up and arrested several of my coworkers. Now, the stakes weren't actually that high. Had the coin flipped the other way, I more likely would have recognized what was going on early and left immediately. Had I not been aware of what was going on, I would probably have gotten out before bedtime because I wouldn't have been involved in the illegal activities. That said, it saved me quite an inconvenience to go the way I did. I've never really returned to the I Ching. I've read a fair bit about the I Ching, but I've probably read fewer than 30 of the 64 hexagrams. I wouldn't know how to take the text associated with any particular hexagram and turn that into an answer to any particular question. I did, for a while, start a process of flipping a coin when I was making minor decisions. If there was logic to apply, I applied reason first. If there was strong emotional attachment to a decision, be that my own emotion or the emotion of another, I followed that. But when I'm just making a decision to get me through, I flipped a coin. I would pray, I would choose what the answers were, then I would flip. I never flipped twice. I always made sure to set what the result would mean in advance, and I always prayed for guidance before flipping. Honestly, most of the time, I don't think God cared. I would flip, and I would get a random answer, and then I would follow the results. I streamlined the process eventually. If the question was just yes or no, then heads was yes and tails was no. If I was choosing between a man and a woman, heads was the man and tails was the woman. If I was choosing between my regular habit and something new, heads was my regular habit and tails was the new way. Such and so forth. While there were dozens or maybe even hundreds of times when I don't think God was involved at all, there were a few dozen times when I think God was involved, and my steps were guided. I had a time that I was angry after reading an email, and flipped a coin to decide if I should write back immediately or write the next day. Tails. The next day, I flipped again to see if I was right. Tails. The same the next day. And the next. After 10 days of this, the person wrote me an apology and took it upon themselves to repair the damage in our relationship. Getting tails 10 times in a row had saved me from escalating a situation that just needed time to repair itself. Until last week, it had been years since I flipped a coin to make a decision. There are several reasons for this. For one, I don't typically carry cash. For another, it takes some explaining sometimes when there are others around. Last week, I was on the fence about seeing the movie The Forge, and so I flipped a coin. I had the same pattern that I've always had. I prayed. It was a yes/no question, so I had the answer set. My reasons and passions were balanced about the question. I was kinda tired, but I was also curious about the movie. It was heads. At the theater, I let the cashier choose my seat. Then, when I sat down, right behind me was a person that recognized me from years ago. I'm not so good with names or faces or people in general, but they apparently were. This ended up being just a little reminder to me that God really is in control. Over the years, I've read a lot more about the I Ching than was in the introduction to that worn-out old version I read after Kung Fu class in high school. I don't know that God is always active in every coin flip I have ever made or will ever make. I do know that there are times when God has been active. I also know, after all my reading, that what I'm doing when I flip that coin isn't wholly and substantially different than what the mystics who use the I Ching do, except that my version is less complicated and quicker. There are those that think it's also similar to the way the Urim and Thummim were used in ancient Israel. Along the way, I have found some things that really disturb me though. I've found mystics that use the I Ching in Chinese, and they have claimed that the English translations of the I Ching are not as useful for divination. Some of these same people rocked my understanding of the Tao Te Ching, saying that the text of the Tao Te Ching is meant to be sounds rather than words, and that it doesn't make sense when you really read it in Chinese. I was skeptical of these kinds of claims until I read James Legg's The Religions of China. His description of Taoism was strikingly similar. So I don't claim to know what Chinese mystics are doing with the I Ching, nor do I claim to know what's really going on with the Tao Te Ching. Heck, let's throw Confucius on the pile while we're at it. I'm far less skeptical of divination in general than some other Christians. I think that if we are faithful to ask God for guidance, that we are diligent in putting our God-given reason into practice, and faithful to follow what He communicates, God is completely open to a two-way communication with us. I don't think we should put these techniques above our reason, and I think that we need to remember that whether God responds is up to God, not us. If we know people that God seems to answer a lot, I think we should emulate them. What do you think? Do you think there might be some value in adding a means for God to talk back in your prayer? Or does that idea bother you?